everyone, Kelly Bear here. I'm with you today for a bit of a philosophical waffle. I haven't done one of those for a wee while. As filming, it is Friday the 19th of May, and I wasn't planning to make a video today. I've been trying to sort of upload or make videos every Friday, but I wasn't sort of prepared to tackle any of the ideas that I have written down in my planner. I have a stack of ideas for videos, either because I'm not in the mood or because I just don't have the headspace, whatever it is. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just skip this week because, you know, it doesn't matter. It's not like anyone's waiting on my videos every weekend. So yeah, I was going to give it a miss. And then I was watching a video over a cup of tea earlier this morning by Leena Norms. She's a YouTuber who I think she started out mostly doing booktube, but she does videos about activism and environmentalism and all sorts of things. Interesting videos. I've been watching her on and off over the years, and she's quite funny. But she had done a video about lies or myths that you've been told about sewing your own wardrobe, and it sort of re-sparked something that I had posted about earlier, both on my Instagram, both my Instagram accounts and my YouTube community feed, which was about playtime and creativity and the way that it feeds into building resilience, which was sort of a lesson that I had learned, a small lesson that well, I say it's not a small, I'm calling it a small lesson, but actually it's quite a big lesson, a lesson that I learned this week. And Leena Norms, the things that she was touching on in the video sort of reignited that that thought process, and there was a bit of sort of overlap going on. And so I say to you today, what does playing, stoicism and activism have to do with resilience? Well, I'm going to tell you, because yes, the playing, it gets kicked off with playing, but then it sparked, Leena Norms' video sparked some other ideas with what she was talking about to do with like stoicism and activism. So that's what I very, very hastily scribbled notes. They're not very neat. I have a tendency to accidentally skip bits. So if I skip a bit, I will try to go back to it if I notice that I've skipped a bit. But yeah, I was sort of writing notes during Leena's video. And so I'm going to show you what started off this whole thing. So I was watching what was I doing? I was sewing some pouches for my next shop drop, which I haven't announced the date yet. I haven't decided, if you're wondering, just in case you're wondering. And I was feeling really tapped out. And I've spoken about this a lot, about not wanting to always be making the same sorts of things. I enjoy making pouches, but I don't want that to be all that I do. When I initially started my shop back in 2016, I was selling accessories, hair accessories, and like jewelry, like brooches and shoe clips and hair clips and all sorts of bits and bobs. I just wanted to be able to make art and make things to sell, and that's why I had the tagline for my shop being "Welcome to my creative laboratory," because it was literally just a play space for me to, you know, a space, allowing space for me to play and make and then sell things, because I get to the point where I get so obsessed with making something that I make too many of them, and then people go, hey, you should sell these. Of course, I'm not advocating that you should monetize every single hobby that you have, but I'm a maker. I've always been a maker. I've always had creative jobs. I've always been someone doing something, and so my initial training was in fashion. I did a fashion degree and I worked in that industry for a long time. I then trained in hair and makeup, and I did that, which is also adjacent to the fashion industry, although I worked predominantly in the cabaret and burlesque and sort of alt world. Although I did do some like fashiony bits and bobs, and I did some stuff for TV on and off. But Yeah, I've always been a maker, and alongside all of that, ever since I was a kid, I've always been drawing and painting and sewing and sculpting, and so this was just a platform. So when the pandemic hit and I was unable to do my usual job of hair and makeup, what was my side hustle of having this little Etsy shop, it became my main thing. It's my job, it's my work, and it's tough, I'm not going to lie. And because of that, and because I've sort of been through my YouTube channel, and I'm very grateful for it, don't get me wrong, I've become known as that person that makes these Kelly Bear bags, these Kelly Bear pouches, these deck bags. And I'm very proud of them. I put a lot of attention and detail and love and care into every single pouch that I make, and every single parcel that I put together. I posted out a parcel this morning actually to a regular customer, and I just love wrapping them up and sending them out on their way. And just people write such lovely reviews. It just warms my heart. So, but I have been feeling very tapped out, and that's partly because I feel stuck in a rut, partly because it's very difficult and I'm not really able to make a living for the fact that it is really hard out there at the moment and everyone's struggling, but also due to like health stuff that sort of gets in my way and sort of impedes my, I'm a chronically ill person, so trying to work well and manage my own time is really, really difficult. And so I was feeling really stuck in that way. I was feeling very uninspired. It's been a really rough 3 and a bit years for a lot of us, right? And yeah, I just feeling really, really tapped out. But I haven't been allowing myself the space. I keep saying I need to experiment and do some research and development for new things for my shop. But actually, there was other goals that I had for 2023, and one of them was to improve my hand embroidery and beading skills, right? And I haven't dedicated any real time to that because when I sit down to do it, I'm like, I should be making stuff for the shop, or if I'm gonna try something new, it should be something that should be for the shop. But that I get in my own head. There's too much pressure, and so I don't allow myself to sort of run away with things and get into a state of flow, of hyper focus, of getting carried away with something exciting, a new project. And I was just like, I was making this pouch, and I just started watching a video that came up on my recommended feed on YouTube because I've been watching a lot of like sewing tube, mostly historical sewing tube, but like craft tube as well. And it was just like slow stitching something or other by this woman called Terri, I think her name is, and her channel is Cool Kooky Creatures, and I will link it in the description box. But she was showing you how she does her slow stitching process. So slow stitching literally just means hand sewing, and or just sort of or taking your time with hand sewing. It involves embroidery, it can involve beading, it can involve various other sort of sewing disciplines. It can involve hand quilting, which is the traditional method, hand piecing a quilt, um, sashiko, things like that. And she talks about and demonstrates in this video and many other videos her technique, the way that she does it. And I was so like, oh, I have loads of bits and bobs to like make stuff because I'm an arty crafty person. I have all sorts of supplies in this room. So I paused the video when it was almost through, and I just like grabbed a load of supplies. I put the pouches aside, and I started sewing a thing. And that thing that I made was just a little slow stitched, or some people call it mindful stitching or mindful sewing. This little sampler, it's on just a piece of scrap felt. So this was a piece of felt that is an offcut that I've cut into a square, and it was sort of a little wonky shape. I wouldn't have been able to make a pouch or anything from it. So, but I keep most of my offcuts, threads, fabrics, all sorts, trim. I just keep offcuts. If I'm getting rid of a garment that is completely dead and the fabric isn't salvageable, I will trim off any trimmings, buttons, anything like that. Just always been like it ever since I was a kid. I love saving, so I'm a magpie in that sense. So I made this. Is it the most amazing thing in the world? No. But you know what? I had so much fun making this. I spent, a wee bit of time taking my time, maybe about 3 hours slowly altogether, using scraps of fabric. There's some bits of pajama. That's a piece of my husband's pajama. The pinky plaid bits, these are bits of my pajamas. This purple fabric is this length of fabric that my mum brought back, hand dyed fabric from Kenya when she went to Kenya for her 50th birthday. There's a piece of black lace here, which was a part of a piece of lace that my French neighbour had given me. It's proper French lace that she had that hadn't, she's a bit of a crafter as well, and she hadn't used it, and she said, do you want it? And then there's other bits of felt, you know. And yeah, and all of the thread is offcuts of thread. Actually, I will show you. I'm just going to wheel over here. For the most part, as long as I've got lengths long enough, there's little trims of thread. Loads of these little decorative bits are just made with offcuts of thread that from pouches, you know. So it was made entirely from, you know, things that would otherwise be discarded. So this is made from essentially trash. I've made something beautiful from something that would be thrown away otherwise. Well, not by me, because I'm a hoarder in that, like, magpie trim craft hoarder. I don't know, you know what I mean. Like, I wouldn't know, hoarding isn't the right word. I don't hoard them, I save them for later use. And I'm one of those people that's very good at using my supplies. I don't save stuff for best. I'll use stuff. I love using my things. That's what they're there for. I talk about this with tarot as well. It's raison d'etre is to be used. I don't have a deck that I would never touch or use for a reading or shuffle or anything like that. Unless it was like an antique that was 500 years old. Yes, of course, within reason, right? But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And so that was on Tuesday, late Tuesday afternoon, probably about 4:30, 5 o'clock. And I was feeling really, really tapped out. And I'd done quite a lot of sewing, like pouches and things. And I was like, I just need a break. When I came back Wednesday morning to this desk to work, I felt this like renewed vigour. I felt really like my creative tank had been filled up, and this playtime had made me feel vigorous again. It made me feel excited to get back to sewing my pouches. I felt like I'd released, almost like a little steam release on a pressure cooker, just released something that needed to get out. And I happily sewed. Again, up until about 4:30 in the afternoon, and I was like, do you know what? I've gotten a good chunk of stuff done. I'm going to make another sampler. So I pulled out a different colour and different colours of trims, and I made this little guy, and I was getting a bit fancy with it. So come on, camera. There we go. So we've got some mesh, we've got some glitter ribbon, you'll recognise from my pouches, some more felt, a tiny offcut of fabric that was part of my tiny bits that have left over, because I've been using it over the years, of the fabric from my degree, my collection that I made for my fashion degree. I made a lingerie collection, and this is a small piece of fabric from that, a piece of vintage fabric from my mother-in-law, another piece of vintage fabric from my mother-in-law, buttons, you know, when you get those spare buttons to replace on clothing, you get attached in a little bag. I've got some buttons, and then I've got some yarn that I couched on there as well, and I just had so much fun making that. So again, that was on Wednesday. Thursday, yesterday morning, got up feeling really, like, you know, buoyed up, and carried on doing what I was doing. I felt inspired and actually motivated. I always put off making double pouches because they're a lot of work, especially with the embroidered panels and all the stuff, and making the charm and everything that goes with them. But I embroidered the panel. I did it on a embroidery hoop properly, like a grown-up. And I made the charm for it and everything, and I got a good wedge of stuff done yesterday. And then by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was like, you know what, I could finish off those pouches that I've got there by attaching their ribbons and their little hearts, and I would have got them finished. But I was feeling really inspired again. I was like, I'm going to make another sampler. So I made this like teal and turquoisey one. Again, lots of things. Anyway, this is all by the by. The point being that I was feeling really, really inspired and resilient from, like, doing something for myself. This isn't to sell. This isn't to put in the shop anywhere or gift to anyone even. It's for myself. You know, it's helping me improve my hand sewing and embroidery skills because I'm practicing things like French knots and these little daisy stitch things here, and you know, it's I'm just really enjoying it. So I hope I'll get around to making some more of these. But that's what I've done so far the last 3 days. I'm just gonna have a sip of tea. So I was like, wow, this is helping me to feel resilient. I'm like, I have the resilience, the strength to then go and do my actual work, the headspace. And it reminded me of the Leena Norms's video put me in mind of that because she was sewing these clothes for herself and she was really enjoying it. She taught herself how to knit and she was absolutely enjoying it. And she was saying it's very meditative and mindful. So there's that again, that idea of doing something slow, crafting, slow making, mindfulness, and how she just was going through all these lists of things that you're told about or you think about or lies you that are told about making clothes, like you need lots of money to start sewing your own clothes, you need lots of space to start sewing your own clothes, all sorts of things that that it's really really difficult, all sorts of myths that she was debunking. And it made me think, you know, there's this resilience in creativity and play, especially if it's for yourself, because obviously I'm creative all the time, that's my job, but play, literal, like whether that's playing in the kitchen, playing with paints, playing with sewing, playing a game, I don't know, playing D&D. I play a lot of D&D. It's important, right? It helps build resilience. It's an important thing. And that led me to another thing that I thought about being building resilience, which is autodidactism, or being a self-learner, being good at teaching yourself things. So that's what Leena's doing. She's teaching herself how to make clothes. She's following courses and watching videos and, you know, slowly but surely teaching herself how to make garments. And this is something I'm really passionate and excited about because that's literally what I wanted to do from a very young age, right? I'm literally sitting right here next to my beautiful beautiful sewing machine, Dolores, and I love her. But you know, so whether that's hand sewing clothes or like some of the historical sewists will 100% hand sew, or they'll sew on like a historical sewing machine, a vintage sewing machine, an antique sewing machine, or whether you've got a modern sewing machine. I've got a Janome. You know, it's all it builds resilience, right? Because you're learning to make your own clothes, or you're learning to grow your own food, or you're learning to cook, or you're learning to repair and tailor clothes. That's another skill that's really useful, as opposed to just making your own clothes, learning to alter them or refashion them into something. These things all help to build resilience because um, they are, firstly, they're things that are good for your brain. You're being creative, you're problem solving, you're learning new skills, that kind of thing. But also in the sense of, we are in a period where the old systems, or the current systems, are starting to crumble, they're starting to collapse, they're starting to fall apart. And I think it may be that that is actually something that needs to happen in order for change to happen. But before things get better, they might get a bit gnarly. And I'm not like a doomsday prepper or anything like that, but I do think that things like being able to grow your own food, being able to forage and wildcraft and understand herbalism and what plants are useful for your own medicine, I think that being able to cook from scratch, fresh things. And I'm aware there's a certain element of privilege in a way in the Western world, because these are things that people, that a lot of impoverished people have to do, right? They have to get by, they have to be able to repair things, they have to be able to sort of subsidize or grow their own food if they have the space, the land to. They have to rely on herbal remedies, which makes me think of a book that I just finished reading, Mexican Gothic, where there's a folk healer who sort of supplements the work of the village doctor by also providing herbal remedies that are very effective, and the doctor endorses her and accepts and appreciates her support alongside the work that he's doing. So it's become almost a bit bougie to be doing those kinds of things here in like in London, for example. If you're in a big city or a suburban area, it's seen as kind of like, oh, it's a bit middle class because you've got the time to do it. But actually, when we think about it, these are skills that are very, very useful for being able to survive. You know, can you build a fire from nothing? Do you know how to start a fire? How to chop wood? All these kind of things that are like really useful in resilience, and I mean resilience in like they're like survival skills. They're life skills. I mean, how many times have many of us thought? I certainly have, and I've heard other people saying, um, you know, weren't we taught, you know, budgeting and budgeting and money management at school? Why weren't we taught cooking in a more sort of, I mean, they still had home ec when I was at school. I still did some cooking, but it was all very like, now girls, we're going to bake some scones. And I feel like actually teaching children, not just girls, all people, to young people to cook, and really, really useful. I think learning sewing skills is really, really useful. They're just life skills that are really handy and are going to see you through. Yeah, you know, things like car maintenance. If you know, back in the day, for me, car maintenance would have been a useful thing to learn. I think you have that in America. I remember seeing in films and TV shows. There's like seems to be like driving lessons in some schools, and then like there's like some of them have like mechanics workshops or something, garages, which is interesting. But yeah, I'm like, yeah, why didn't we learn those things? You remember when they said, oh, you shouldn't use a calculator because you won't have a calculator with you 24/7 when you're an adult. Oh, really? Really? I don't know how useful. As someone who has dyscalculia, I've always struggled with numbers anyway. Yeah, I, I use my pocket calculator all the time, and I haven't really needed geometry and things like that, which is interesting because I'm trained in pattern cutting and garment construction, which is flat pattern cutting. I did do some draping on the stand, but most of my training was flat pattern cutting because I was training to like go into industry. And so I learned how to take flat shapes and extrapolate that into something that would fit around a three-dimensional body. And yes, it involved numbers, but luckily it was a lot of numbers that I was able to sort of manage, because it wasn't any sort of, it's like, addition and subtraction and a little bit of division. And if I got stuck, I could always use a calculator, because no one's going to tell me as a pattern cutter. Every pattern cutter that I knew had a calculator on their pattern cutting desk. Like, it wasn't an issue. They're like, yeah, of course you can use a calculator, and a measuring tape and what have you. So I can't remember what my point was, but yeah, I just think that some of the stuff we learn at school isn't necessarily helpful. It's like history. I hated history at school. It was boring as fuck. It was all about remembering the births and deaths and reigns of like kings and queens of England. We learned about World War I and II and a couple other bits. And actually, now I'm an adult, history is eternally fascinating to me. It's so vast and, global and interesting, and, you know, way they just don't they don't do it service in school, in my school at least, anyway. So, being inspired and by art and crafts and doing things like learning life skills helps build resilience for, both mental, emotional resilience, but also resilient, like actual resilience in being able to get through times, like if you needed to actually be in a position where you needed to build a fire or mend clothes or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, and linked to the autodidactism, it leads into what you would call thriftiness, I guess. So being thrifty, if you're growing your own food, you're going to get quite thrifty, right? If you're making your own clothes or refashioning clothes or repairing, tailoring clothes, that's quite thrifty, right? because rather than throw something away and get something new, you are making something fit you properly, or you're repairing it so you can continue wearing it, or you turn it into something else. Like I've sometimes turned t-shirts into tote bags to use. So it's the t-shirt's had it, right? It's absolutely knackered, you can't wear it, it's an absolute, but you can chop it up into a certain shape and cut handles into it and it becomes a tote bag, and therefore you extending its life only as something else, right? So that's thrifty. And also sort of setting yourself challenges to see if you can go without certain things without having to buy something new, because like I certainly am not in a position where I can always just go and buy and replace things. You know, I've had an influx of decks this year, but that was Christmas and birthday money. The rest of the year I don't like buy. I'll save a little bit of that Christmas and birthday money to treat myself throughout the year, but like I'm not off going, oh well, I really want that deck, I'm just going to buy it. I can't, I'm not in that position, right? So I'm quite thrifty. That sort of extends to like clothes or toiletries or makeup or anything, right? So I like almost all of my clothes are secondhand. They're thrifted. Almost my entire wardrobe, and it has been that way for years. Like in my 20s, I bought and wore a lot of vintage. I then also then got rid of a lot of it because I'm very clumsy, and I realised that I was actually in a position where I might be damaging historical clothing, and I, rather than just keep it in a box somewhere where it's not getting worn and loved, I decided to sell them on either to friends that had online sort of vintage shops, or gifted them to themselves to the friends who like wearing vintage for them to wear it because they're much less clumsy and messy than me. Um, so yeah, I very rarely buy anything new clothes wise, and it's, or if I'm buying I new, I try to buy is where possible somewhere more ethical. That's not always possible, and again there's an element of privilege in that, being able to shop around. But for the most part, I just find what I need second hand, or I will refashion something from a charity shop. I'm like, well, it's a bit too big, or it could do with being shortened, or I can add something to it, so I'll refashion it or sort of tailor it. Um, and yeah, I've made my own clothes on and off. Not for a long time. I haven't actually fully made full items. There's a couple of projects I have in mind for making my own stuff, but I've got some fabric that I can use. I try not to have too much of a stash these days. Actually, Leena Norms talks about that, about being anti-stash. I've tried not to hoard fabrics. I mean, over the years, I've definitely, especially when I worked in the fashion industry, I had a lot of fabrics coming my way because I was around fabric all the time, and you'd get offcuts and cabbage and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so I'm not talking about like suffering for the sake of suffering and seeing if you can go without stuff and like really being hard on yourself. But yeah, see if you can extend the life of that garment. See if you can um, learn to keep that plant alive, keep that herb, keep that basil plant alive, keep it going. Like, you know what I mean? And just see what happens from that. On saying that, then it made me think of stoicism and another video that I had watched. With this is the third video I'm mentioning. There's the Leena Norms one, there's the Cool Kooky Creatures crafting one, and I'm going to talk about Jazza. Jazza is an artist. I've been following him on and off over the years. He's an Australian guy, and he has a second channel which is called Jazza Vlogs. And he did a vlog a couple of months ago, and it's like it talks about a day that changed his life, and it's the day that he discovered stoicism, or rediscovered stoicism. My foray into stoicism in my late teens, early 20s was sort of via Seneca. I don't know what happened to that book. I think I had a book about letters from Seneca, or something to do, basically a book about Seneca and his philosophy, but I think I lent it to someone and never got it back, which is the way it seems to be whenever I've lent out books, which is why I don't lend out books anymore. If I give you a book, it's because I'm gifting you it. It's like I don't expect to see it again. But yeah, he and other stoicists, and he's the only stoic that I've actually read. I know a little bit about some of the other stoics, but I've never read their stuff. But which is something I want to change. Actually, it's something that's been on my list for a while. But stoicism is a way of the Stoics would set themselves challenges, and one of the ways that Jazza did this is like doing cold showers, but rather than just gearing himself up for a cold shower every morning, he tosses a coin. So he's introducing chance into it. It's almost like a bit of divination, a bit of coin tossing, which is quite fun. And now I've got to toss a coin to your Witcher in my head, because why is my brain like this? But yeah, like Seneca was really helpful for me when I was working in industry and commuting and working of like a 9 to 5. Well, it's usually longer hours than that because fashion industry, but you know what I mean. Working a regular job. And although I'd say the kind of work that I did wasn't regular because I still wasn't doing a desk job. I was pattern cutting, but you know what I mean. I was employed by an employer and going to work on a regular basis on the tube, as we tend to do here in London. Well, I'm already at 30 minutes. This is very rambly, waffly. I was sort of regretting going on and on about these at the beginning because it's like, I got a bit sidetracked, so I apologise for that. You could always skip through. And the thing that really helped me was Seneca was like, if you're always prepared for the worst, then you're not shocked by anything, you're not taken aback, or you're less likely to be sort of thrown off. Now, as someone who doesn't do well when things change, when sudden changes to my plans, to my day, when something sort of pops up, I find it very, very stressful and very difficult to deal with. I can sort of go into meltdown or sort of paralysis. I found this mindset really useful, and it might sound quite pessimistic to people, but it can be seen as that, I guess, but it wasn't taken in that light in when I read it. And the way that I explained it to people is like, so he in the book where they're explaining it, they talk about driving to and from work and being stuck in traffic, but I didn't drive to and from work, I took the tube. So to sort of take the driving in traffic analogy and switch it to how I commuted, it was that every morning and every evening when I get on the tube during rush hour before or after work, the tube is going to be absolutely packed. It is going to be jammed. The likelihood of me getting a seat on the tube is slim to none. The chance that multiple tube trains will have to go past me before I can even get on one to get to or from my destination is also quite high, depending on whether there are delays on the line or there's been accidents or what have you. So if every time I commute I have in my mind, right, well, chances are it's going to be packed, I'm not going to get a seat, and I'm probably going to have to let a couple of tube trains go past me before I can get on one. I'm prepared for that mentally, right? So when that doesn't happen, it suddenly leaves room for like, oh, I got on a train straight away. Oh, I'm not squashed into someone's armpit. That's nice. Even further, oh wow, there's a seat free and I'm able to get it. I'm gonna sit down and read my book more comfortably. Like, it becomes, but if all those things that I thought was going to happen, it's absolutely jam-packed, 3 tube trains go past me and I have to get on the 4th one, and it's rammed and I'm stuck in someone's armpit and there's delays and we're stuck in a tunnel and all that stuff, because I'm like, this is probably what's gonna happen, I'm prepared for it. And it didn't. Because if you're going on the tube every single day and you're like huffing because it's busy, and you're huffing because you can't get a seat, and you're huffing because you've stopped in the tube tunnel for a couple of minutes or what have you, or it's like, well, this happens almost every single day. Why are you huffing? Why are you acting surprised? This is the way it is. So if you just sort of have this level of acceptance, it takes the stress out of it. And I found that so useful. And once I started doing that, my commutes between my book and or like having my MP3 player, remember those? My MP3 player, and before that, my mini Discman. Do you remember those? To listen to music, should I wish? I was like chill as a cucumber. I would like rock up out of the tube station, either getting, near my work or on the way home, and I'd be like a cool little Zen master. It was magic. So like stoicism is actually a really good way of building in resilience. Now, I don't know enough about stoicism. I'm only going by the small amount that I've read, which again, like I said, it was Seneca. It's something that I do like. This reminded me, like, oh yeah, that's something I wanted to go into. Again, I will post Leena Norms's and Jazza's vlog video about stoicism in the description box. And then all of this made, and it was again, it was making me think of like how these skill building and building resilience is all really good for activism, right? Activism is resilience, and resilience, being resilient helps you be an activist, if that makes sense. You have to be resilient if you're an activist, and that does mean, for me personally, again, there is a certain amount of privilege involved in this, where I have to take breaks from social media and the news, right? Because I have anxiety disorder, I suffer with depression, I'm a chronically ill being, I have like brain squirrels, all sorts of stuff going on, and sometimes it gets to the point where I cannot cope and my mental health is so like fucked that I need to step back. And I'm aware that I'm very lucky that I am able to do that. There was a time when I wasn't able to do that. When I was a kid growing up in a single parent household, in social housing, on social welfare, I was constantly bullied at school. I was bullied on the way home from school, both by people from my school and from kids from other schools. And then I would get home and my home life was quite stressful. I had a very, there was no escape, right? I was in it. I was in this life of growing up in a very sort of stressful environment where we didn't have much, and I'm aware like how sometimes you just can't escape it. And for me, my escaping was drawing or Lego, in like what Lego I did have, and like reading, escaping into books and escaping into my sketchbooks was such a big part of life. So grateful to the school libraries where I was able to like get a hold of books. So that was my escape, and I wasn't so much in the news when I was a kid. As an adult, like, I'm not saying that when I'm not watching the news and I'm not on social media that I'm escaping. I'm having a break, but like I said, there's a privilege to that. But the reason I do that is because it allows me the space to build up my fortitude to then continue on in whatever it is that I'm doing, just living and existing, and also trying to be as much as an activist as I can. It's a lot more difficult being someone stuck at home a lot in an ongoing pandemic. But I do what I can within my limited means and sphere of like influence, and hopefully one day that will open up to a point where I'm able to be a bit more involved like I used to be. But that activism, that mutual aid, for example, building in, that's resilience. That's resilient. Mutual aid is sort of community resilience. Activism is resilience against oppressive structures and oppressive governments, oppressive laws, oppressive, just all sorts of kinds of oppression, right? Or activism against bigotry, big one for me at the moment, transphobia, trans activism against transphobia, and always been an advocate against homophobia, biphobia. Being a bisexual person, I have experienced my fair share of biphobia over the years. Fighting against ableism as someone living in a chronically ill body. And I'm not saying that I have to be associated or have personal connections to a cause for me to care about it. There are other causes that I care about very much that I don't have a direct experience with, but are very dear to my heart. But it's resilience, right? It's like, whether it's joining a union or forming a union that like up the worker again, workers' rights, or it's resilience. And it made me think of something else, like Leena's video. She talks about the reason she thinks, because she talks about the amount of garments people bought in 1991, and I think it was like something like 35 or 36 items of clothing or accessories a year was the average that I think it was people in America would buy. And then by a few years ago, by 2020, 2021, the amount that people bought like items was something like 65 or 67 items of clothing. That blows my mind, because I don't even know if I buy like 5 items of clothing in an entire year, and those are usually second hand, and this is even before the panini. I've kept a lot of stuff over the years, um, all just repaired stuff or refashioned stuff over the years. Loads of my stuff I've had, like, you see that like skelly jumper that I wear, that crop that I cut into a crop shape. I've had that for like at least a decade, and it cost me £5. This t-shirt, I haven't worn it much on my channel because I forgot that I had it, because it was too tight on me for a really long time, and it had like the usual, it had a proper collar on it, crew neck collar. And when I did my wardrobe swap over last month from my autumn winter wardrobe to my spring summer wardrobe, I was like, oh yeah, this t-shirt, and I tried it on and it fit me better, and I was like, oh, I haven't worn this for ages. But I was like, I want to cut out, I wanted it to be a bit more like summery, comfy, so I decided to cut out the crew neck, because I'm not a massive fan of crew necks on a baggy t-shirt. I feel like you need that room to make it feel a bit more shushy. So I was like, yeah, I can wear my Aladdin Sane t-shirt. So I gave it a new lease of life, but I kept it because I was like, this t-shirt will fit me again one day. There's so many clothes that I did get rid of because I felt I would never fit into them again, and now I would, but it is what it is. Sometimes you just need to let the things fly and other stuff will come in. It doesn't matter. But yeah, so Leena was talking about how people have become so disconnected. There's a sense of disconnect. We're disconnected from the food we eat, especially if you are a meat or fish eater. People are so disconnected from the way that animal gets from being a live animal to whatever it is you've got on your plate, right? There's a real disconnect. And so I'm vegan. I've been vegan for a long time. I was vegetarian for about 16 years before that. But I found that people just were like, don't tell me, I don't want to know, because they don't want to address the reality of how food gets onto your plate, right? And so there's that disconnect there. So for me, I'm like, I couldn't, depending, right, because never say never, because who knows what situation you will end up in. But the idea of being able to raise animals and then kill them, slaughter them and prepare them and cook them, it's not for me, right? But who knows what kind of Mad Max apocalyptic world we might end in as the climate crisis continues to get worse. So never say never, but in this society that we live in, it's not for me. And so the way that we get meat to our table is very unethical and very it's not great for the environment, it's not great for the welfare of the animals. I get called a bad vegan because I would rather buy a really good pair of leather boots and wear them for a decade, which is a real life example. The boots that I wear most during the winter, I've had for 10 years this year. They were bought for me by my mum, bless her. I would rather, whereas if for several years before that, when I went vegan, every winter I'd have to buy a new pair of vegan boots made out of like pleather, which is not actually great for the environment either. And so that was like 4 or 5 pairs of boots that went into landfill that don't biodegrade because they're plastic. And so my mum said, let me buy you a pair of leather boots in a classic style that you can wear. And so she bought them as a gift for me, and I agreed, and I felt really weird about it, but I sort of really weighed up the pros and cons, and actually I've had them for 10 years and they've got loads of life in them still. Like I fully expect to be wearing them in another decade. They might need resoling at some point, but they don't at the moment, and they're great. Like, to me, having one pair of boots for 10 years is better than buying a pair of plastic boots once a year and them going in landfill once they've fallen apart. So there's that. And also I'm like, a lot of like white vegans are very like, all meat is bad, and it's like, well, it's also very colonialist for you, because you can't be going into indigenous people. Like for example, there was this big drive against indigenous people, First Nations people in Canada, with their like meat production, or the Sami with the reindeer, and it's a very sort of important part of their culture and their life. And to go in and say you can't do that with reindeer, or you can't do that with seal meat and seal fur, is like a really colonialist view, and not for me to like, that's part of someone else's life and culture, and actually, you know, not, it's part of a survival for a lot of people. um, and yeah, that's just an example. So yeah, I've been called a bad vegan before, but we need our causes. If you're going to be a feminist, or if you're going to be a vegan or an environmentalist, you need to be intersectional, right? That's why I always say I'm a vegan, but I'm also an environmentalist, and so that environmentalist side of me tempers my veganism by sort of, you know, there has to be a balance there. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. But Leena Norms saying that there's this disconnect, and she was saying that making her own clothes made her appreciate the work that goes into clothes. She's really, really thinking about the fabric that she's buying, the pattern that she's using, the amount of time that she's going to have to put into making this item of clothing, and the care that she takes of this item once she has completed it and is wearing it on a regular basis. So it becomes infused with more meaning, you appreciate it more, and she's saying, you know, like, it almost has this sense, it becomes alive for you, it has its own sense of personality, which is animism. Remember that podcast from the Emerald? Animism is normative consciousness. Yeah, so you suddenly have this connection, you know. So she's saying that the reason we have become, you know, partly, yes, capitalism, but also disconnect, means that we've become this sort of very consumerist society, and actually connection allows us to fill that space that we need, because we're social creatures ultimately. And so, you know, activism and mutual aid is part of that. And she talks about, you know, collectivism and sort of socialism, in the sense that, you know, it's really, really handy to, you know, she's saying you don't have to make your own clothes if it's not something that you're able to do or willing to do or care about. But maybe there's another skill that you have. Maybe you are really good at cooking, or maybe you're really good at growing vegetables and you have an allotment. Then you become part of this community of people, this collectivism, where you are, maybe you are sharing your vegetables that you've grown, and someone else will repair or tailor some clothes for you, and someone else is like batch cooking something and sharing that with you, like preserves and jams or something. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, it becomes much more, you're sharing your skills. And she said that's another thing that's really cool, is that you could do skill swaps. So not only are you skill swapping in that sort of sense where I sew something for you or repair something for you, and you give me some vegetables from your garden in a trade, right? That old version, that old way of trading, right? Because people misunderstand. People say, well, capitalism hasn't always been the way, but trade has always been around, and people have paid with both money for things, but also bartered and traded skills and other things, right? It's always been around. It's just this particular model of trading, of commerce, has only been around with us for the last 150 years, 200 years, and it is unsustainable. But yeah, Leena also talks about like skill swaps, in the sense where you go somewhere and you do a workshop and someone teaches you to knit and you teach them how to crochet, like it's a similar thing. Or you teach someone how to repair clothes, do maybe some visible mending, and they teach you how to like fix your car, like change your oil, and you know, or whatever it is, you know. Skill swapping, someone teaches you, takes you on a foraging walk and helps you identify plants, or trees and things like that, that you can then use in your wildcrafting for teas and tinctures and syrups and things like that. And then you teach them something else, like you teach them how to cook really great Thai food, I don't know, whatever it is, or to bake bread. And that is all to do with connection and collectivism, and it all builds resilience. It builds resilience in the heart, resilience sort of just in the fact that you have these skills that are really useful, and resilience as a community. And I just think that that's really beautiful. And yeah, that's 15 minutes of rambling. I think I went off on some tangents. There was a little bit of an anti-capitalist rant there, despite the fact that we all have to live in a capitalist environment at the moment and get by however we can. I am aware of that, yes. It's hard to escape. But yeah, that it's a philosophical waffle, which means obviously I wrote some notes. I did go off piste a little bit. I did get distracted at the beginning showing you my little samplers. But you know, as I always like to say, you don't have to watch it if you don't like it. But if you did like it, if you have any thoughts on this video, let me know down in the comments. How do you feel about playing and stoicism and activism and resilience? And yeah, let me know. I'm interested. I'm intrigued. Do you sew your own clothes? Do you grow your own food? Do you do woodworking? Are you really good at DIY? What resilient thing do you do? Do you have, what skill do you have that helps make you feel like, yeah, I've got this. This is a really handy life skill that is also sort of swappable or helpful to other people. Let me know in the comments. So yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up here because this has gotten very, very long as usual and very, very rambly, and it's getting close to lunchtime and my little tum tum is getting a bit grumbly, so I'll have to be, I'm thinking I'd have some kind of toasted sandwich, grilled sandwich type thing. Yeah, anyway, sorry, distracted. I love food. But I'm gonna go. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I really appreciate you if you made it this far, or even if you only made it 10 minutes in. I appreciate you, but you wouldn't be seeing this bit obviously because you would have already stopped watching. You know what I mean? I appreciate you taking time out of your life to listen to me waffle on about whatever it is I'm always going on about. And yeah, this will be going up hopefully tonight on a Friday, so I hope that you have a good weekend if you're watching this over the weekend, and if not, I just hope that you're having a good day wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Sending you so much love, and yeah, I shall see you in the next one. Ciao.